Marilyn Golden, Senior Policy Analyst, Disability Rights, Education, and Defense Fund. For the past 25 years, Marilyn Golden has led national, state, and local system change efforts to enhance transportation for people with disabilities. Marilyn's advocacy has been focused on a broad range of transportation issues: fixed-route buses, passenger rail, ADA paratransit, motor coaches, taxis, and airport shuttles. As a national transportation advocate, she has led the struggle for many of the policy victories during and since the ADA to provide better public transportation for people with disabilities.
I'm Marilyn Golden from the Disability Rights, Education, and Defense Fund. For over 25 years, I've worked on national system change to broaden the civil rights of people with disabilities in transportation. Pairing disability with civil rights may seem odd to some, and I'm going to have a chance a few minutes later, I think, to talk more about that. But in terms of where it started, for me it started when ADAPT, which is a grassroots direct action disability rights organization, decided to protest at an APTA conference, the American Public Transportation Association conference, in 1987 in San Francisco, near where I live, because APTA at that time refused to support a legal requirement that new buses must be accessible by lift or ramp to people with disabilities. After that, I was drawn into the policy debate to pass a strong, comprehensive Americans with Disabilities Act, which would include that requirement. More to come.
Oh, thank you very much, Marilyn. Dan and Marilyn, I'd like to go to you and ask, as we celebrate your work today, wondering if you can spend a few minutes reflecting on one of your most significant accomplishments in advancing transportation connectivity. And we can start. Marilyn.
Okay. Thanks. I actually want to address that question by addressing a more threshold question. As I said, pairing disability with civil rights may seem odd to some. The prevailing view in society is that disability is a personal thing, a medical issue. We call that the medical model. And we've worked for decades to get people to understand that the prevailing heritage of isolation and segregation and exclusion experienced by most people with disabilities in just about all human societies is not a function of our disabilities alone, but is about how society relates to us and our disabilities. So it's a social question. When I was growing up, segregation and exclusion of people with disabilities was legal. Segregated schools and institutions had no requirement to change. Few people could really see what was happening in those terms because everything about disability was covered by the gloss of good intentions. The burden, the dealing with the consequences of disability rested on the individual. Society had no responsibility to remove access barriers. Leaping to today, when buildings have ramps so wheelchair users can participate, as I did today on this very platform, when government hearings have sign language interpreters, as we have today, so deaf people can participate, when government programs send letters in formats blind people can use and read, and when schools properly accommodate all children with disabilities, the walls of prejudice and discrimination fall. These changes did not occur because social institutions changed on their own. They changed because a political movement, the disability rights movement, learned some lessons from the civil rights movements based on race and sex. Our movement succeeded in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to pass civil rights laws, the most famous being the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. These laws required the changes I named, and many others too. They have enough teeth that historically unwilling institutions, education, medical care, employment, housing, the commercial sphere like stores, restaurants, and hotels, and of course, transportation, all made what I like to call literally concrete changes to include us. The struggle is far from over. Many people in this movement spend long work days, years, and decades to realize full equality. Some of them are in this room. It is my true privilege and honor to work among them. Lastly, our struggle occurs in a context of inequitable funding that forms the backdrop to all discussions of public transit in this country, whether or not it is acknowledged. The U.S. dedicates huge amounts to facilitate transportation by automobile. $48 billion proposed by U.S. DOT for 2015, but only $17 billion for public transit. These priorities inherently disfavor large sections of the population, including people with disabilities, and other disenfranchised constituencies, just as in all of Secretary Fox's examples that we heard earlier today. All the wonderful transit programs out there, no matter how well they implement the ADA, and though we appreciate everyone involved in the effort to make that implementation happen, nevertheless, it could never truly fill the funding gap that I'm describing. Our country must stop neglecting adequate support for public transit, for travelers with disabilities, and for all transit-dependent populations, including people who can't afford cars. Plus, spending on cars does not decrease climate change, another critical national priority for everyone, but spending on public transit can. Thank you.